Welcome to the lecture on Introduction to Break-Even Analysis. So, in this lecture we are going to discuss about what the break-even analysis is, what is a break-even point, how it is important, and what are the different terminologies related to the break-even analysis. So, break-even analysis, it is also known as the cost volume profit analysis, because here we are talking about the cost, we are talking about the volume of production and then profit, related profit. So, that analysis is done, and it is an important technical tool for business performance and profit planning, for restructuring the fundamental relationship between cost and revenues. So, when we talk about the business organizations, there we know that we have different type of costs. So, you have to first put in, you have to set up the plant, you have the investor has to put a lot of cost, then there is production of the product, and that product goes for sale. From the sale we get the revenue, and then that is how, after getting revenues for a long time, we come at a stage when we think of having profit. So, basically any business has the aim of having profit, and in this analysis we are going to talk about that quantity which which talks about the stage from where the profit starts. So, we will talk more about it. This point occurs when the total cost of production has been recovered by revenues from the product sales. So, that is what we discussed, that when we start selling the product and we get the revenue from the sales, then slowly we are coming at a stage when the cost which has gone into and the revenue which we are getting, so they are balanced. So, it can also be the determination of the amount of revenue that can be collected before earning any profit. So, we reach at a stage from where onwards, if we get the revenue, then we are in a stage where we get the profit. So, that is what that stage is, that is. So, if the firm produces or sells multiple products, it is more appropriate to determine how much sales volume should be collected before a certain store begins to earn profit. So, you have to know that how much sales revenue has to be collected, so that after that you are sure that you are going to earn the profit. Technically, the break-even analysis is to find the point that refers to both the break-even quantity of product and the break-even revenue of the sales. So, both the things are basically important, and it is referred to. And break-even point, by definition, it is the point at which the profit would be 0 and the total cost would equal the total revenue. So, as we discussed that you have a cost component, and the cost component, as we will discuss, there are two types of cost components that generally is discussed, and these two types are fixed type of cost and one is variable cost. So, altogether they make total cost. Now, total cost should be equal to the total revenue, that is the stage where there is no profit, and when the total revenue will be more than total cost, then there is a stage of profit, that they are the stages of profit. And if the total cost is exceeding the total revenue, so those stages are the stages of losses. So, geometrically it is the point of intersection between total cost and total revenue curve. So, you have a total cost curve, and you have a total revenue curve, and their intersection geometrically will be defined as the point of break even. Now, once we locate this point, we would know that all production before that point incurs some loss, and that after that you will have the profit. So, that we will see that how we analyze those situations. So, what we see, what we discussed, that normally when we talk about the cost. So, total cost, basically when we talk about the total cost. So, total cost will be comprising of fixed cost and the variable cost. So, in the plant normally you have the fixed cost, and then that basically does not change with the quantity of production. So, whatever be the quantity of production, these costs do not change much, like depreciation be it, or maybe salaries of the employees, indirect those who are not directly involved with the production operations, administrative expenses and all that. So, that comes under fixed cost, and variable cost is normally those costs which are changing with the quantity of production of the item. So, that way as the quantity will be increasing, these costs are increasing, like direct material cost or direct labor cost. These are basically the variable cost. So, they are normally expressed in terms of per unit, and fixed cost is always cost whatever be the. So, depending upon what is the capacity of production. So, till that the fixed cost will be constant. So, we have total cost C will be known as the fixed cost plus variable cost. So, we normally define that. Now, variable cost will be basically equal to V into Q, and V is defined as the variable cost per unit. So, that is how this V, small v is defined, and then the number of units will be Q. So, total variable cost will be V into Q. So, the total cost becomes FC plus VQ. Now, this is the total cost of the product when we are producing Q units. Now, we talk about the revenue which is generated because of the sale of the item or the product. Now, the revenue will be denoted by R, and it will be equal to small p multiplied by Q. So, P is nothing but the price which has been fixed for the product, and it will be price per unit of the product. So, what happens that now what we do in this case is, depending upon the revenue and the total cost, you will have a stage of either profit or loss. So, profit will be basically the revenue what is generated and minus the total cost. So, profit, which is also known as the operating profit, or earning before interest and taxes. So, that is EBIT, or it is also known as, and this will be denoted by PR, and that will be your revenue minus total cost. So, whatever revenue is generated, that has to be more than the total cost, then you have profit. In case of loss, this quantity will be negative. Now, if you see that R is your PQ and the total cost is FC plus VQ. So, this way you have it will be coming as Q into P minus V, and then you have FC. So, this is the expression for the profit. Now, when we talk about the break even point, Now, at break even point, your sales and after sale the revenue which is generated, it is same as the total cost, that is your profit is 0. So, for break even point your profit has to be 0. So, you have Q minus, so that implies that Q into P minus V minus for fixed cost should be 0, and that leads to the value Q will be fixed cost divided by P minus V. So, this is the expression for the break even quantity. So, F C upon P minus V, this is the break even quantity. Now, if you have to find the revenue at the break even point, so that is known as break even revenue, and the break even revenue. So, if you go for the BER, so BER, that is break even revenue, will be this is the quantity. So, and the rate is P. So, break even revenue will be P multiplied by Q. So, that will be F C and then multiplied by, so it will be 1 minus V by P. So, it is defined as the break even quantity, and you have the definition of break even revenue, that is, it is that amount which is generated at the break even point. So, that is how we define this break even quantity and break even revenue. Now, we will talk about the variables which are the related to the break even quantity and break even revenue. So, what we see, we have seen that your Q is fixed cost by P minus V. So, you have Q as fixed cost by P minus V, and break even revenue will be fixed cost by 1 minus V by P. So, that is what we have got. Now, what we see that in these cases you have for the break even quantity, you have one is fixed cost, and another is this is your price per unit, and this is your variable cost per unit. Now, as we know that fixed cost as a function of time, it does not change. So, like rent, lease payment and all that comes into it, and then variable cost is something which is changing with the quantity of production, and the V, that is your or this P minus V. So, this is known as the contribution margin. So, this is defined as contribution margin. So, this is nothing but the amount of profit which is earned on each unit sold above and beyond this break even point. So, amount of profit earned on each unit sold above and beyond BEQ, break even quantity. So, if you go above or beyond BEQ, it will be profit, and if you are below that, you will have the case of loss. So, or amount of loss incurred on each unit below break even point. So, it is defined as the contribution margin. So, this is how the contribution margin is defined. Graphically also you can see how you can look that how these break even quantities are basically defined. See, the normal case when we talk, this is the quantity of production, So, your fixed cost will be something going like a quantity which is fixed, and your variable will be going on. So, you will have a variable quantity like this. So, ultimately you will have this as the total So, you will have this is your income line. So, whatever you generate, whatever you sell, based on that you will be getting this income from the sales. So, this will be for the P into Q line, and then this will be your this will be your total cost line. So, this is your total cost line and this is your revenue line. So, this is going to cut it here. So, as it is going to cut here, so you will have this point, and this point will be your economic order quantity, because this is the fixed. So, as this was the fixed cost, and then as the variable cost has increased, then so fixed cost plus variable cost line will be this. So, this is your total cost line and this is your revenue line. So, this point will be your the point of break even point. You can further see that this is the ordinate is for the cost, different type of cost. Now, you can see that what we have seen, the profit line is Q into P minus V minus F C. So, that you can see the profit is P R, that is Q into P minus V minus F C. So, that is what we have calculated, Q into P minus V minus fixed cost. Now, what this line also indicates that this is nothing but y equal to m x plus c basically. So, this is again a straight line, and this straight line has c component, that is minus. So, this will be your minus line, and then if it is q and this is the cost, in that case if it is q. So, this line will be the line representing this q into P minus V minus F C, and P minus V is the slope of this line. So, this P minus V is slope of the line. So, if this is the profit, this is a profit and this is the loss. Now, initially you have the this is the this is a fixed cost, this is F C, this is F C basically, and this is your P minus V is the slope, that is marginal contribution or contribution margin is the slope of this line. What we can see that if this fixed cost is changed, then this may lead to a line. So, this is your original line, and if the fixed cost is increased to this much, in that case this was the break even quantity 1, and this will be your break even quantity 2. So, what you see that when the fixed cost will increase and there is no change in the marginal contribution, in that case the break even point, the break even quantity will increase and it will shift towards right. So, it means that when the fixed cost is increasing, you require larger units to be produced, so that you come at a break even point. Second case may be the change in the marginal contribution, and if you change the marginal contribution, suppose in these cases. So, this was your earlier situation. Now, in that case either you can increase V or P, or decrease V. So, that way the slope will increase, or you can decrease P or increase V. So, that way slope will be decreasing. So, if the slope is either increasing or decreasing and the fixed cost is changed, suppose you are decreasing the slope means the variable cost is increasing, or the revenue cost per unit, that sale from the sale whatever revenue are getting, that is decreasing. In that case this value will decrease and the slope of this line will decrease. In that case what you see that the break even point, break even quantity 1, so that will be changing, it will go to 2. So, that way it will move towards right and you require larger units to be produced, so that you reach at the break even point. And if conversely if the P is increased, that is income from per unit is increased, price of the is set more and variable cost is fixed that way. So, then if this will increase, the slope will increase. So, slope increases, then this situation will be like this, and this will be your break even quantity 3. So, in that case the break even point will move towards left, and it means lower amount of units are required to be produced to come at a stage where the profit is same as the loss. So, this is the effect of these parameters like fixed cost or the marginal contribution, which is affecting the quantity produced to reach so that you are at a break even stage where there is no profit or there is no loss. Now, we are going to further study about cash break even technique. So, there is a term known as cash break even technique. So, that is in that case we are going to deal with the charges, some non cash charges. So, when there are certain non cash charges, when we talk about the fixed cost, which also involves certain non cash charges like the depreciation of the assets and all that, basically in those cases we can have the break even point, that is known as the cash break even point, because basically we are overestimating by taking the depreciation charges into the fixed cost, although they are a part of fixed cost, but then basically we can take the benefits of these charges by other means, maybe in taxes or so. So, we can exclude them while doing the break even analysis, and when we do that, then they are known as the cash break even analysis. So, we deduct so we deduct these non cash charges. So, that is to avoid overestimation of break even quantity or break even point. So, what we do is that is known as cash break even point, and cash break even point is as we discussed that you have otherwise you have F c upon P minus V, and in this case we will subtract these non cash charges, and then this will be P minus V. So, this will be your non cash charges, so that will be subtracted, and basically this is having a sizable portion among the fixed costs. So, basically that will reduce that will decrease the break even point to quite considerably in such cases. There is another terminology, that is your break even point with targeted profit. So, many a times we deal with those cases where we think of having a certain profit in mind. So, that is your break even point with targeted profit, and in that case the break even point with so break even quantity with targeted profit, again here in this case we have to add these targeted profit, whatever we have thought of, what is the targeted profit which we think of, and then that will be divided by P minus V. So, this will be known as the break even point. So, that is this quantity which will give you certain profit. So if you have to calculate that how much quantity should be produced, so that this much profit is minimum desired. So in those cases, that is your break even quantity only defined, but with a targeted profit. So that way this break even quantity with targeted profit will be defined. Similarly, you will have break even revenue also. In those cases will be nothing but you have FC plus TP and divided by it will be multiplied with P. So that will be 1 minus V by P at the denominator. So that will be your break even revenue at that particular value of targeted profit. This is your break even revenue generated. So this is also calculated using these break even point analysis with targeted profit or the technique for these non cash charges. What we see that when we talk about these cash break even technique, in that case we are subtracting these non cash charges, and in this case we are basically adding these targeted profit. That is the only difference when we talk about this cash break even point and the break even quantity with targeted profit. That is the basic difference, that in one case we are subtracting to avoid any overestimation of the break even quantity, and in this case we are basically adding, which will tell you that what will be the break even quantity. It will talk about the break even quantity, but it will include those cases, it will include the profit which is to be earned at that particular quantity. So that is why it is defined as the break even quantity with targeted profit, and that is why you have here addition of TP in the numerator with FC, and here it is subtracted. So ultimately as we discussed, we had discussed this profit volume this curve. This is known as a profit volume curve, and this was the case of the the break even analysis, break even point. And here now what we see that this this is the reason which indicates the loss. So this will be loss, and as you go up you have the cases of the profit. So this is the region of profit. So that is what we discussed, that you have the shaded region which is towards the left of this break even point, which indicates about the area where there is loss, and when you move from here you assume that this is a case of profit. So as you go on you will have profits increasing, and here we have assumed that this cost line is basically, or revenue line is a straight line, and they are meeting at a point, whereas the revenue line may be non-linear, and in that case there may be situations when it may cut at 2 points. So that is known as a dual break even point. So that we will discuss later, and in those cases you will have a region where you have profit, and below and above you have the regions of losses. So that way also you have the regions which can be indicated that whether there is profit or there is loss. So these analyses are the ones which are basically required to be known, and as we know that the break even analysis is very much useful many times. Suppose you are selling the stocks or you are purchasing the stocks. So in those cases these are useful. When we are estimating, many a times people estimate or they try to come to conclusion whether to take retirement prematurely or not. So these are the typical applications where this break even analysis will be giving you the option whether you will be at profit or at loss while doing that. So in that case, what is the income, what is the So all these taking into point, you can come to that conclusion. So that way this analysis is useful in such cases. Thank you very much.